My name is Ethan Carver. I was 32 years old when everything in my life was torn apart by something I cannot explain. Before this began, I was a physics lecturer at the University of Chicago. I lived alone in a quiet apartment off South Ellis Avenue and had long accepted the predictability of my life. I never imagined it would all be shattered by a single phone call on a rainy Thursday night in October. The call came from an old colleague named Dr. Thomas Rourke. I had not spoken to him in 6 years, not since he left the university abruptly. Under circumstances no one ever explained. He had once been a brilliant neuroscientist working on a classified project for the Department of Defense. After his departure, rumors of his mental breakdown spread like wildfire. Some said he had seen something that drove him to madness. Others believed he had stumbled into unethical experiments. When I answered, his voice was strained and trembling. He told me he needed my help for something urgent, something only I could understand. I asked him where he was. He said he was operating out of a repurposed research facility in Barrow, Alaska. He begged me to come alone and not tell anyone. I laughed at first, thinking it was some elaborate prank. But there was something in his voice, a kind of fear that chilled me to the bone. He said he had discovered something buried beneath the ice, something older than humanity itself. I told him he was being ridiculous. Then he said one word that made my blood freeze. He said Anunnaki. I had only seen that word once, scribbled in the margin of a 13th century manuscript stored at the university archives. The professor who had shown it to me suffered a stroke days later and never recovered. I packed a bag that night and booked a flight the next morning. I told my department I had a family emergency and would be gone for a week. The flight to Anchorage was uneventful, but the bush plane ride to Barrow was harrowing. A snowstorm battered the plane as we descended, and the pilot warned me not to stay longer than a day. Locals did not trust that place anymore, he said. Too many strange disappearances. When I arrived, Thomas looked like a ghost. His once well-kept hair was now a tangled mess, and his eyes were sunken and twitching. He greeted me without a word, simply nodding and leading me into a heavily secured underground facility. Everything felt off. The corridors were too cold, and the lights flickered every few seconds. I asked him what this place was. He only said it used to be an observatory, then a missile silo, now something else entirely. He took me to a room where monitors displayed biometric readings, seismic data, and something else. A sequence of patterns that pulsed like a heartbeat. He called it the signal. He said it was not a sound, but a vibration that existed beyond normal perception, and it was waking up. He showed me footage recorded from the ice caves beneath the facility. The walls shimmered like obsidian and pulsed with a faint red glow. I saw markings, symbols that changed every time I blinked, and I heard something. A low hum that did not come from the speakers. It came from inside my skull. Thomas said it began when they drilled too deep. Something responded, something intelligent. It communicated not with words, but with impulses, and it knew us. It understood what we feared, what we loved, what we believed, and it hated all of it. I asked him what he needed me for. He said I was the only person he trusted to help him shut it down, but he warned me. Once I entered the lower chamber, I would no longer be the same. Nothing would. We suited up in thermal gear and descended into the dark. The walls were alive, breathing, pulsing. As we went deeper, my thoughts became cloudy, my memories twisted. I heard my mother's voice whispering things she never said. I saw flashes of moments that never happened. Thomas walked ahead as if guided by something I could not see. Then we reached the gate, a massive structure carved from black stone that radiated heat despite the freezing temperature. It opened slowly, without sound, and what I saw on the other side ended the man I had once been. The chamber beyond the gate was massive and spherical. The walls curved upward and disappeared into shadow. I could not see the ceiling. The surface, beneath my boots, looked like obsidian, but felt like wet skin. Lights blinked in the darkness. Not like bulbs, but like the reflections of eyes watching me from every direction. Thomas stepped forward with reverence. He held a device in his hand, a thin wand with a small needle at the end. He pressed it to his temple and whispered a word I did not understand. The needle punctured his skin, and a flash of light surged through his body. He collapsed. I rushed to him, but his eyes were wide open, pupils dilated, unmoving. Then he spoke. Not with his mouth, with mine. His voice came out of me. It spoke. Through me, twisting my lungs and throat into something foreign. I tried to scream, but only heard him. I have seen it. I know its shape. Ethan, you must finish what I could not. They will come for you soon. They always do. Then his body convulsed. Blood poured from his nose, ears, and eyes. He grinned before dying. Not a peaceful smile. A smile of knowing something I could not grasp. I backed away, slipping on the wet surface. A low hum filled the chamber again. But now, it was clearer. It was saying my name, over and over. Not with sound, but with thought. Ethan, Ethan, Ethan. Each repetition made my muscles tighten. I wanted to run, but my body would not obey. The walls pulsed and folded inward, forming a corridor where there had been none. The corridor led downward, into darker places. I followed, against my will. Something had entered me when Thomas died. Something old, something that had been waiting. The air grew colder, but the walls grew warmer. I touched them and felt a pulse like a heartbeat. Each time I blinked, the corridor changed shape. Angles twisted. Gravity shifted. I vomited once and kept walking. Eventually, I reached a second chamber. This one smaller. Inside stood a figure. Not a man, not a woman. Tall, featureless, cloaked in what looked like fabric but moved like smoke. It turned to face me, though it had no face. It spoke without speaking. You are the aperture. You are the wound you are. The door. I asked what it meant. It showed me not images, feelings. I felt drowning in sunlight. I felt laughter turn to ash. I felt the moment of my birth, and the second I would die. I felt the skin peel from my bones, and the bones remember pain. It stepped closer. My skin blistered from its presence. I tried to scream again. My mouth would not open. My jaw was frozen in place. The figure reached out a hand. I expected death. Instead, it touched my forehead and whispered one word, remember, and I did. All of it. All the lives I had lived before. All the versions of myself that had walked other paths. All the worlds where I had not come to Alaska. All the worlds where I had died. And the one world where I became something else. I awoke outside the gate. Thomas was gone. No trace. The monitors in the lab were dead. The lights were off. My watch said only minutes had passed. My mind said centuries had passed. The hum was still inside me, did not leave the facility. I know that now. What woke up in that chamber returned to the surface, wearing my skin, but it was not me. Not entirely. Pieces of me were missing. Names, dates, memories that once defined me had slipped through some unseen crack and vanished. I stood in the observation room for hours, staring at the blank monitors, unable to recall my father's face or my own. Something was waiting, watching, not just from outside, but inside. It fed on recognition. Every time I tried to remember a moment from my life, I felt it shift behind my eyes, clawing away at the details, devouring them. I attempted to write my name on the wall with a marker. My hand trembled. The letters looked foreign. I tried again and again, but each time the name changed. First Ethan, then Elijah, then Evan. With every iteration, it felt less like a mistake and more like a theft. Like something was reaching backward through my thoughts and peeling my identity apart. I searched the facility for signs of Thomas. All I found were smudges of blood near the lower lift and a single boot abandoned in the hallway. My own face stared back at me from a cracked mirror in the medbay. Eyes, darker than I remembered. Skin too pale, lips moving before I thought to speak. I am Ethan Carver. I teach physics. I live in Chicago. My mother is alive. My mother. The words unraveled mid-thought. At 3:11 a.m., the lights went out. The emergency backup flickered on with a dim red glow. That same hum returned, louder now, like it was crawling up through the floors. I locked the doors and tried to contact the outside world. Nothing, no signal, not even static, just silence. Then came the knocking, not from the entrance, from beneath, steady, deliberate. It echoed through the steel and concrete like a heartbeat turned inside out. I followed it. Something told me I had no choice. I descended into the tunnels again, past the gate, into the second chamber. The figure was gone. In its place stood a pool of liquid like mercury, swirling without ripples. On its surface floated names, thousands of them. Some in English, others in scripts I could not recognize. Some names glowed, others flickered like dying stars. A voice spoke, not aloud but from the pool itself. "You have been chosen to forget." Asked why. It answered memory as rebellion. I reached toward the pool. My fingers hovered inches above its surface before I realized one of the names was mine. Ethan Carver, glowing faintly, flickering like the others. I wanted to grab it, to reclaim it. As I touched the liquid, pain exploded behind my eyes. I saw flashes of other people's lives. Children crying in smoke-filled rooms. A soldier screaming beneath a crimson sky. A woman whispering secrets to a mirror that whispered back. And beneath it all, something immense and ancient slithered across a horizon of bones. It had no shape, no sound, only hunger. When I pulled back, the name was gone, replaced by a blank. The pool said one more thing before it sank into the floor. "You are not the first." I collapsed, choking on my own breath, and passed out. When I awoke, I was no longer alone in the chamber. I woke up to a sound I could not place. It was not the hum, it was not the voices. It was silence, true and absolute, the kind that feels like pressure on the ears. I was back in the chamber, but everything had changed. The ground was no longer solid. I floated, weightless, as if submerged in invisible water. The walls had pulled away, revealing a vast nothingness broken only by distant, moving shapes. Shadows in the dark, walking patterns I could not understand. Above me, or below me, something stirred, a sound like teeth grinding inside metal. And then the light returned. A beam from nowhere, illuminating a figure that had not been there before. It wore my face, not dissimilar, identical, same eyes, same scar above the left brow, same exhaustion in its gaze. But it was not me. It spoke without sound, and the words entered my mind like knives you forgot. Too much. It reached toward me, and my body resisted, flailing against invisible currents. But it touched my forehead and everything came back to black. Ring the false city, the machine god, the promise of hunger. My scream shattered the silence. The chamber trembled. Cracks formed in the air itself, like glass ready to shatter. The copy of me smiled and split apart, peeling itself like paper until only a burning core remained. The hidden god watches, and I woke again in Chicago. Everything normal except the humming was still there. The apartment felt wrong. Everything was where I had left it. The same dust on the shelves, the same coffee stain on the arm of the sofa, the same flickering streetlight outside the kitchen window, but the wrong hung in the air like static before a storm. I walked through the rooms, slowly touching the furniture, the walls, the doorknobs, as if to convince myself I was awake. The humming in my skull had quieted, but it was still there, like a memory trying to surface. I checked my phone, no signal. The date said Thursday, October 27th. It should have been November. I opened my laptop, but it would not start. The screen pulsed white once, and then shut off entirely. I stepped into the bathroom and stared at my reflection. Blinked half a second before I did that, was when I noticed the mirror was not mine. The bathroom was the same, but the mirror frame was iron, not wood. There were small symbols carved into the metal shapes. I remembered from the gate. I turned around quickly. The apartment looked the same. I told myself. I was hallucinating. Stress, exhaustion, oxygen deprivation, anything logical. Then came the knock at the door. 3 soft taps, measured and slow. I stood frozen. Another 3 taps. I looked through the peephole. No one there. Opened the door, and a small package sat on the mat, wrapped in plain brown paper, sealed with a strip of tape. No label, no markings. I took it inside, hands shaking. I opened it carefully. Inside was a roll of black film and a note written in handwriting I recognized as my own. Developed this before. Doy had never owned a film camera in my life. Yet, as I read the note, I remembered taking these photos in. Impossible memory unfurled behind my eyes, flashes of buildings that moved like lungs, people with their faces turned inside out, a circle of stones humming in the dark. I stumbled back and knocked over a lamp. When the room darkened, something else became visibly. Second note had been scrawled inside the box lid, invisible until the light changed it. Said, "You are not the original. Do not let it fully remember." My hands went cold. My heart pounded against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I ran outside. The street was empty, completely empty. No cars, no people, no sound. The sun hung motionless in the sky, rising, not falling, just fixed. I ran block after block. Storefronts were frozen mid-motion. Birds in the sky hung like painted dots. At the corner of 59th and Dorchester, I saw hair, a woman in a white coat, back to me, standing perfectly still. I called out. She did not move. I walked toward her slowly, every instinct screaming to run the other way. As I reached her, she turned around, and she wore my face. She did not speak, neither did I. We stood there on the corner, like mannequins under a dead sun. Then she stepped forward and put her hand on my shoulder, and in that instant we were no longer in Chicago. We were somewhere vast, a city of impossible geometry, buildings that bent upward and inward, bridges suspended without support, windows looking into rooms that did not exist. He stumbled back from her and hit something solid, but there was nothing behind me. "You do not belong here," she said, but her mouth never moved. I tried to speak, but no words came. This was not a dream. It was not a hallucination. This was a place, memory of a place older than thought. She walked ahead of me, and I followed, because I had no choice. Every step echoed like thunder through the stillness. We passed beings, some human in shape, but utterly wrong, their faces blurred like smeared paint, their limbs jointed backwards. They bowed as we passed. "Who are you?" I finally managed to ask. She stopped. "I was the one before you. For me, the one who touched the gate," and did not forget. Her eyes burned with a terrible sadness. "You were made from what was left, a shard of a man too broken to survive." Shook my head, trying to reject it. She continued walking, and I looted the end of a bridge carved from white bone. We came to a throne, not stone, not metal, a living throne, breathing, twitching, and seated upon it was a thing that wore a shape like a cloak. It shifted with every glance, sometimes tall, sometimes hunched. Its face a mirror. It spoke, and the city shuddered. "Do you remember your name?" I opened my mouth and said, "Ethan Carver." The throne laughed without sound. "Then you are still useful." The woman looked at me one last time. She whispered, "Do not let it build again." The city vanished. I was on the floor of my apartment, the roll of film clutched in my hand. The humming had grown louder, and now it was coming from under the floorboards. At first I thought the humming was in my head, but then I pressed my ear to the floor, and it was louder. There a rhythm behind it, like breathing. I stood up, slowly walked to the kitchen, grabbed the longest knife I owned. Then I pried up the first floorboard, and underneath was not insulation or concrete. It was flesh. Not human, not animal, pale gray skin pulsing like a heartbeat, veins the width of cables. A single black eye stared back at me from the dark. I dropped the knife. The floorboard slammed shut on its own end. The humming stopped. My phone vibrated, screen cracked, and bleeding lights. A message from Thomas. "You woke." It screamed and threw the phone, but it vanished mid-air as if it had never been there at all. The walls began to bleed, not red but Ink spilled from cracks in the plaster, sentences in languages I had never learned, but now somehow understood. Do not trust the sky, it lies. The gate breathes when you blink, he sees you. Agani turned and ran into the hallway, but the hallway had changed. No longer led to the stairs. It was a corridor of doors, all identical. I picked one and opened it. Inside was a field of teeth, just teeth, no sky, no ground, a horizon of teeth clicking and grinding. Shut the door and tried the next. My childhood bedroom empty, but my mother was standing at the window, only she had no eyes. He turned and said, you should have stayed dead. I closed the door. I was sobbing. The third door opened on a staircase, spiraling downward, black stone steps, no handrail. The air was thick with rot and salt. I descended. The farther I went, the less I remembered. My name began to slip, my memories blurred by the 100th step. I had forgotten why I was walking by the 200th. I had forgotten what legs were, but something below kept calling, a sound that was not a sound, a hunger that pulled me like gravity. Then I reached the bottom, a chamber so wide I could not see its end. The floor was wet with something alive in the center, a tower of bodhisattvas together into a shape that should not exist. They were all meal ethanol, screaming, and they all looked up. Hand said in one voice, you are the last piece. I did not scream. I could not. The sound had stolen everything from even my voice. The tower of screaming Ethans collapsed into dust and the chamber went silent. Then a sharp crack like a bone splitting came from above. Light, not sunlight, something colder, something mathematical. It peeled across the ceiling, revealing a message carved into the stone, a frequency, a signal, 21 9HC. I said it aloud without knowing why, and the world changed again. I was in a hospital hallway, fluorescent lights flickering overhead, the walls discolored and pulsing. A nurse with no face handed me a clipboard, but the paper on it was blank. Over the intercom, a voice repeated, all visitors please proceed to room 219, room 219, room 219. I dropped the clipboard and ran. Doors flew past, all numbered 219. No matter how far I went, all 219. I stopped, turned, opened. One inside was an old television, the kind with knobs and static. It flickered to life as I entered. The screen showed main real-time standing in the room, but there was something behind me on the screen, a figure tall, wrapped in something like gauze, its head pulsing with static. I spun around, nothing but the static. Sound grew louder, deafening. I fell to my knees, clutching my head, and then it whispered, not in ears but in teeth, you are a relacidly. I remembered Thomas, not the message, but the moment he disappeared, what I saw flicker across his face in that last moment, recognition. Had been here before. He had reached the signal. I rose to my feet, opened another door. This one led to a cathedral of glass shards, suspended in midair, mirrors that reflected places I had never been. I saw myself in a reflection, but not as I was. In wires and incant, I was speaking, but the glass bore no sound, only the movement of lips. I leaned close, read them, do not let him finish the transmission. The mirror shouted, and I awoke again in a room that looked like my apartment, but smelled of salt and rat. In the wall, carved deep, was a countdown, 19 days left. The countdown burned itself into my thoughts every time I blinked. I saw the number 19 dice. I paced the room, hands shaking. The smell of the sea was stronger, narratin, kelp, and wet stone. The lights flickered and dimmed on. When they came back, the walls were gone, and I stood in a tunnel. Its walls pulsed with light veins glowing red beneath translucent stone. A sound echoed from ahead, a wet dragging. I walked. There were shapes in the walls, people, or what used to be people, frozen mid-scream, their faces distorted by terrorism, war, lab coats, others hospital gowns. One wore my shirt. I kept moving. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the tunnel resisted me like a throat, trying not to swallow. Then I reached a junction, 3 paths each marked by a word carved in rust. Truth, memory, escape. I chose memory. The tunnel narrowed, the air grew cold, and the light dimmed until I walked in near darkness. I heard my own voice ahead, speaking words I did not remember, saying, you let her die, you let him build the tower, you Opened the gate, and then forgot you ran forward, trying to reach myself instead. I emerged into my childhood home. But it was wrong. Everything covered in a fine black dust. I moved through the living room, the kitchen. My father sat at the table, lice missing his mouth, sewn shut. He held a photograph. It was me, but the photo was still moving. My image blinked and turned to look at Meadow. Not remember, it said. The photo ignited in blue flame behind me. The walls cracked open. A network of veins spilled outward, glowing bright and fast, pulsing like a signal. And I understood these tunnels were not under the city. They were inside it. Inside everyone, every connection, every wire, every heartbeat. It was a network, and something was using it. I turned and fled back through the dust and fire, the voice of my other self laughing behind me. When I reached the junction again, all 3 signs now said the same thing. Obey. Took the center path, and at the end was a room filled with showing live feeds, every camera in the city, all watching. On one screen, I saw myself in real time, staring up, blood leaking from my eyes. The camera glitched in behind me. The gauze-wrapped figure appeared. A Gant's head split open like a blooming flower, and inside was a map. The veins, the network. It had already reached everyone in the final screen. A number pulsed in red. 18 dies. I stood in front of the final door. It was not made of wood or metal, but of bone, and it breathed. The countdown had stopped, not reset, not vanished, just stopped, frozen at 18, as if waiting. The gauze-wrapped figure stood beside me, not moving but vibrating, like a signal held in place. Raised one hand and touched the door. It opened without sound. Inside, darkness that moved, shifted, twisted with thought, not empty, full, saturated with meaning, too large for language. I stepped inside and fell upward. There was no gravity, no direction, no sensation. Peeling away of time, I saw every moment of my life replaying at once, layered over each other, but they were not mine alone. Alone, their lives, other eyes, other screams, all woven into the same thread. The network did not connect devices, it connected souls. At the center, a throne built of hands, stacked and bound, fused by regret and memory. The figure sat there now, but its wrappings were gone, and I saw its face. It was mine, but older eyes, black as oil, mouth sewn into a smile. It spoke into my mind, not with words but with way too. Called me from the static. You built the frame, you invited the signal, and then you ran. But I remembered. I watched. I learned now. You will see what you tried to forget. He raised his hand, and the city peeled open like a film catching fire. I saw them all, the people moving like puppets, each pulsing with light, each connected by veins, and above, floating through the air, were blueprints, massive ancient schematics of the mind of belief. Transmission. You are the broadcaster, he said, and they are tuned. I tried to scream, but I had no mouth, no body, only signal. He touched me, and I shattered, reassembled into every version of myself, split across possibility, endless watching, and in every version he sat on the throne. I reached out, tried to pull one thread loose, one thought that could change it, and I found Ita, name not mine, not his, hers, the one I had let die, the one I forgot her name. Cut through the static, and for a second everything paused. The throne cracked, the signal faltered, the city dimmed. I screamed her name, with it tripped myself free. I awoke in the real world, or something like Eden, an alley in Boston, hands bleeding, mouth dry but alive. Checked my phone. The countdown was gone, but something else was there. A new ape one. I did not install its icon, pulsed a single word beneath it. Obey. The signal is still out there. I can feel it behind every screen, beneath every wire, and I know now the God was never hidden. It was waiting.